Thank you for being here. We've got 8 people in. That's awesome. I think only like 15 people registered. It was one of those things that I didn't do a very good job of promoting this because I wasn't sure how I was going to put it out there. It's a tough topic to talk about. This is the what you don't need for Christmas. It's the anti-gift or anti-buying guide period for photographers, okay? And it's been a tough year for me on the buying side of things, and I want to talk about that because it's plaguing me as a photographer. It's plaguing me as a creative, and I feel really bad. I feel bad because I feel like a lot of people have tried to keep up, if you know what I mean, with some of the purchases that I've made this year as far as gear is concerned, and I really don't want people to think gear is that important. Okay, so that's the main idea behind this whole thing. I've gotten myself into this little trap, and I'm going to tell you this little dishwasher analogy, and you'll get it after that. So part of where this came up from was my wife and I were talking. I love to wash dishes. I love hot water running on me. I love showers. Sometimes I'm known to take 2 or 3 showers a day. And yes, some of them are 15 minutes long. But I do that because that's where I get my best ideas. When hot water is running on me, I get awesome ideas. Actually, most of the Zone System Express came from hot showers. So I know that about myself. I also know that the idea for the Zone System, the original Zone System that I created, I don't know, 4 years ago, came when I was washing dishes. So I like to wash dishes. So here we go with this dishwasher analogy. So I'm washing dishes the other day, and my wife comes in and she's like, we just bought that brand new dishwasher over there, and you're still washing dishes. And I said, you know what? There's 2 things for me on this one. I said the first thing is that I like to wash dishes, number 1. And number 2 is that I feel like because we didn't save up for that dishwasher and we just bought it, that I don't value it. And she said, really, that's interesting. I said, no, you don't understand where I came from as a child. I was raised not necessarily poor, probably lower middle class. Just to give you some background, my dad was in the military. He was a senior airman, which is like an E3, and he had 3 children. And my mom wasn't working at the time. She was raising the 3 children. So growing up on that type of pay is very difficult. We didn't have all the luxuries that I have for my children these days. And I learned a lot in that time. I learned how to save money. I learned how to value things after I saved that money to purchase that thing. So perfect example. We wanted a Tetris game when we were kids. So my parents said, you guys can get Tetris, but you have to save up your allowances. We can't afford to buy that. So my brother, my sister, and I all saved up our allowances to buy Tetris for the original Nintendo. And of all the video games I've ever played, I think that's the only one that I actually truly value because we saved up for 3 months to purchase that. So back to this dishwasher thing. So I told my wife, I said, I feel like because we just bought that dishwasher and I didn't have to put it on layaway or I didn't have to save for it. We just went to Home Depot, we had them deliver it, and boom, we had a new dishwasher, that I don't value it as much as I would if I would have saved for it. So then I started talking to her about my photography stuff. And I said, I feel the same way right now about my photography. I'm sitting here, right next to me, right there is a Sony a7R III, okay? Hot off the press. It's been sitting there for 2.5 weeks. I haven't even turned it on yet. And number 1, I'm really busy. I'm crazy busy right now. But I don't want to say I don't value it. What I want to say is that a lot of people have tried to keep up with that gear buying mentality. And really what you're going to see in this live event, just to give you some background if you're just hopping in now, is that this is mainly me talking to you about my trials and tribulations of buying gear, okay? I need to talk to you about some things that are really important about this whole gear buying thing. And it's going to be mainly a lot of this. I will show you some visual things, but it's not going to be quite as much of a visual thing as most of my live events are, okay? So and where a lot of this is stemming from is right now there is a ton of photography gift buying guides, the perfect thing to get for the photographer this year. And there's all these it's junk. It's stuff that you don't need, that you just be adding to your kit because someone's saying to buy it. Now, I feel like I do tell people that I buy these things. And then when I tell people I buy these things, I actually get emails from people saying, hey, Blake, what do you think of if I upgrade to the Sony a7R III? Would you do it? And my answer to them is usually no. My answer to them is I buy these things to keep up with the trends. I buy these things because they're business expenses. I buy these things because I don't go into debt when I do it. Okay, that's a big thing to take away from this. Is when I'm buying gear, when I'm buying lenses, when I'm buying cameras, I'm not going into debt for it. These are things that I purchase with my business expenses. They come right out of my business funds, and I don't get these things given to me by companies. Okay, so when you see me buying these things, I don't want you to feel like you're pressured to do it too. Okay, where this also stems from. So June, let's say September of 2010, I started Everyday HDR, my very first blog. I got home from Photoshop World. I was jazzed up. I was energized. And this thing is making my ear really hot. I was really energized. I was jazzed up. And you can ask my wife. I was so excited about this blog. And she says to me, well, since you're starting this blog, maybe you should buy a new camera. And I said, well, how am I supposed to afford that? We don't really have that kind of money. She said, well, get a credit card and put it on a credit card. I said, I'd love to upgrade to a Canon. At the time, I was shooting with an Olympus E510. It was one of the very first Olympus cameras to have live view on the back. It was actually one of the first cameras to have live view on the back. And I said, you know what? That's not a good idea. Because if I buy a new camera, then I'm not going to value what I'm doing with my blog. Instead, I'm going to tell you this. I'm not going to buy anything for my camera or my hobby unless I can support it with my hobby. So she said, okay, so you think this blog is going to make you some money? I said, well, I'm not sure if this blog is going to make me some money, but I'm going to see what direction it goes. And I'm not going to buy anything. I'm going to talk about my limitations of the gear that I have and make this blog what it is based off of what I have right now. So I did that. 3 years I went with that camera and never upgrading. And the first time I upgraded was after a Topaz Labs webinar. I had received a check from them after one of those webinars. The biggest, I never knew that money like this could happen, but I did a webinar with them, and based on commission sales, I had made $1,900 on one webinar. So I was like, man, look at this. I can finally upgrade. And I told my wife, I said, with some of the ad stuff that was in my account, I can actually now upgrade my camera. 3 years I went. 3 years I went without upgrading my camera. Now, why I'm telling you this backstory is because now, this year alone, I have bought so much camera gear, and I'm paralyzed because of it. Literally paralyzed. I found when I was in Olympic National Park, I have my Sony a7R II and A6300, Sony A6300 in the bag, plus a Sony A7 that was converted to IR with 4 wide-angle lenses, a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, a 50 millimeter lens, and some video recording stuff. And I just thought to myself, where and how and when did I get to this point? How did I get to the point where I've got so much crap in my bag that I don't even know what lens to put on my camera? Really, I'm being honest now, okay? It's a hard thing to accept. It's a hard thing to realize that you as a creative, as an artist, have now picked up so many tools that you don't even know how to be a technician with the tools. And it's actually right now it's debilitating, and it's paralyzing my creative process. I was talking to Jim Leninsky about this. Jim and I are great friends. We talk on the phone probably every day. And if we aren't talking on the phone every day, we're texting each other every day. And I told Jim about this, and he said that he's like on the other end of the phone. He's like, I'm smiling really big right now because you can see this about yourself. You can see the fact that you've become a consumer in this industry and and because of that are losing your creative process. I'll be honest with you, the times that I was most excited about photography was in 2010. In 2010, I just started my blog, I was fresh, I had all these ideas, and what I wanted to be was the anti-pro. Really. I wanted to be the guy who goes out, does HDR photography with an Olympus E510 and made better photographs than people with a 5D Mark II or Mark III at the time, whatever it was. It was my personal goal to make better images with substandard equipment than to have the top of the line stuff. And I've lost sight of that. I've stunted my growth creatively. Now, post-processing wise, I'm good. I've got myself down to a point where I have Photoshop, I have the Zone System Express, I have palette effects. All my needs are met in post. But the stunting part is the gear. So my first point was the dishwasher discussion, the fact that we bought a dishwasher and I don't value it because we just bought it outright and I'm still stuck in my old ways of washing dishes. Okay. Um, the next part was the gear discussion here, which is about how I was most excited in 2010. Gear is now paralyzing and it stunted my creative growth. So now my third point with this is why and how did I get here? And I can answer that 100%. It's the buying trap. Um, Being in this industry, especially sitting in this office, I don't know if you realize this, but I sleep up there. That's my bedroom is upstairs. Our master bedroom is upstairs. My office is below it. I have to exit out of my house from the basement to come into my office. So it's kind of separate, but it's underneath our master. So there's my bedroom. I can actually point to it. I'm sleeping right there at night. My daily routine is I wake up, I make my coffee, I make my tea. I drink my coffee first to wake up. I drink my tea when I come down here at my desk, and I drink tea throughout the day while I sit here at my desk. There are some weeks where I do not leave my house. Actually, the last time I left my house was for church, and that was on Sunday. It's now Wednesday. I've not left my house. I might walk down and get my mail, but I don't go anywhere. So I do a lot of research on things because of that, and in my position being here and trying to keep you up to speed on what's going on. I find all these things that I think I need to have. And there's a hole that I have actually right now, and that hole that I'm trying to fill is the fact that I'm not getting out there with my camera that often. So because I'm not getting out there with my camera that often, I have this preconceived notion that I need this, I need this, I need this for the next time I go out there. Well, this just happened to me before I went to Olympus. I was like, I need this before I go to Olympic. I need this before I go to Olympic. I need this. And I bought all this new stuff. And then when I got to Olympic, I didn't even know how to use it. I was filling a hole that I had in my body, in my cavity, of my inner creative cavity with things that I thought were going to fill that void. So in this discussion of the things you don't need for Christmas this year, if you're sitting here thinking, oh, I really could gift myself this, I really could gift myself this new lens, I want you to think about maybe the hole that you need to fill, and the gift that you actually need to give yourself is getting out there with your camera, okay? Now, realizing your limitations, and the only real thing that you need is not all these lenses and all these gear and these new camera bodies and all this stuff. Is you need, number one, the education on how to use it. You need the experimentation on how to use it, but you also need to just get out and use what you have, because you're not going to fill that hole of what you need to do out there by buying more things to be in here. So I've got a whole bag full of stuff. And we just put this in perspective. This year alone, I purchased a 10mm wide-angle lens from Voigtlander, a 12mm lens from Venus Optics, a 12-24 Sony lens, a new 16-35 lens. Yes, I already have the other 16-35 lens, a 70-200mm lens for that Sony, and also just for some odd reason, some cheap 500mm lens. I've also purchased an A7 converted to infrared, the Sony A7R3. I mean, if you're doing math in your head, you're saying, Blake, that's like over 10 grand worth of stuff. That's 10 grand to try and fill a void that I've got in my system of not getting out there and doing something. I'm not saying this stuff to convict myself or to convict you. What I'm saying this, and why I'm saying this, is because you don't need to have these things. You just need to get out and use what you've got. Understand your limitations. What do you actually need? When you're out on a scene and you're shooting with maybe your 16-35, and you, not just once, but many times, say to yourself, man, I wish I just had something a little bit wider. That's when you probably need to go 14 or 12. But you don't need to go 14 or 12 just because you feel the need to have a 14mm or a 12mm or a 10mm lens. That is not the time to buy something. The time to buy something is when you've actually realized that you need something outside of that 16-35. Julie says, I can relate exactly to what you mean, even to the point where I know I have updated to Fuji and have all my Canon stuff on eBay, restricting myself to just the Fuji and 4 lenses. I want to get back to shooting as well. Exactly. So Julie knows what I'm talking about. And I can understand where you're coming from too, because I converted from from Canon to Sony last year. That's putting the two words together. You see my brain did that? Canon, Sony. So I converted from Canon to Sony last year, beginning of 2016, after renting the Sony A7R II. I realized how good of a camera it was, and I realized the limitation and the need to update. I didn't need to upgrade my my Canon because of the lack of gear. What I needed was more dynamic range, and the Sony a7R II had that dynamic range for me. So I realized by being on the scene a lot with my Canon and then coming into post-production that I needed more dynamic range out of my RAW files. And if you've followed Canon for any stretch of the last 2 years, you've realized that they're not really caring about what we need in dynamic range when it comes to their sensors. So I had to move to that point to get more dynamic range out of my images. I don't know if you noticed, but I stopped doing HDR photography when I converted to Sony. Why do you think that is? That's because the limitations that I had with my Canon required me to shoot for HDR to get as much dynamic range out of one of those images as I needed for post-production. Well, now with the Sony a7R II sensor and the amount of dynamic range that's in a RAW file, I'm not doing that. And in turn, I'm saving a lot of time. So that was not the Sony purchase, a7R II, mind you, not the a7R III that's just been sitting there. The a7R II purchase was a very valid purchase. I needed more dynamic range, okay? So David says, I rented the Sony a7R II and went out to the field for 2 to 3 days and compared Canon to Sony and then made the change. Exactly. I did the same thing. I took the 5DS-R, I believe it was, and the 5DS and the Sony a7R II out on the scene at the exact same time, and I compared those cameras because my next purchase for Canon was going to be the 5DS. But because that 5DS couldn't touch what was happening in the Sony a7R II, I decided at that point I was going to divert my path. So that point that I was getting with there was why and how did I get here? Why I got here was because I don't go out there that much. And I'm trying to fill a void in my system, my personal system, my creative system, that can only be filled by getting out and doing things. Gear is not going to fill that void. The only thing that's going to fill that void is getting out there and doing something with my stuff. What am I going to do about this is a good thing here on this point 3. I'm not buying any gear next year. None. I'm going to buy one thing next year, and that's going to be a GoPro Hero, probably 5, just because I want to have that for my on-location shooting for some background stuff for my courses. But really, I've got all the gear I need. I do not need any more gear. Oh, interesting. My recording just stopped, so that recording is not going to go through. We're going to have to use the recording that's here to put this up on the webpage. So David says, I didn't like the reviews of the 5DS and started looking for something else after having saved for the Canon Mark IV, which never came out. Yeah, now I'm right there with you, David. We needed to convert to Sony, I think. So what I'm doing about this next year is I'm not buying anything in the realm of lenses or camera bodies. If I need to buy something next year for camera lenses and bodies, I've got a problem because everything that I have right now is probably good for the next 2 to 3 years. Okay, so that's how I'm going to fill that void next year by not buying things and getting out and doing what I need to do. Okay, so I guess point number 4 here is how do you determine if you actually need something? So I'm going to switch over here to my screen share, and I'm going to share my screen and hop on over to Photoshop and show you a diagram here. So I'm going to turn my screen share on, hop over to Photoshop, and I'll pop in this. You may have seen this. If you've been following me since 2015, I actually did an entire I did an entire series on buying either gear or software, okay? And this whole series that I did was talking about when do you know you need something. And it's funny because just 2 years ago, a little less than 2 years ago, I wrote a blog post telling me, basically, or telling others how to purchase things and not to get stuck in this, well, you have to buy this in order to be considered a pro, okay? And how I did that was I made several points, and I'll link it in this F64 Elite page here when I put up the replay, so you can read that if you'd like. I reread it today, actually, as a way for me to get back on the solid, stable ground from all this crappy purchasing I've been doing. So looking at this chart will tell you color-coded how and when to purchase something. So you have 2 different categories here. You have the frequency and the expense. And then you have 2 categories within each one of those, low and high. So you have to ask yourself questions. Is the frequency low or high of the use of this item? So I'm going to talk about let's say a flash. Let's say I want to buy a flash for my Sony. So is this flash frequency going to be low or high? I would say that for me, it's going to be low. But is the expense going to be low or high? Well, with a flash, it's probably going to be rather low. So if the frequency is low and the expense is low, then that's probably a good idea for a purchase. But then let's take this Sony 85 millimeter lens that I'm thinking about purchasing that's $1,200 because I went on one photo shoot this year. One photo shoot where I actually shot some clients, okay? Only one. And I thought to myself, well, maybe you need to buy an 85 millimeter, Blake. The frequency of use for that would be low, but the expense would be high. So this color code is basically saying, Blake, you probably don't need that 85 millimeter lens because you're only going to use it maybe once a year. The expense is going to be pretty high. So do you have a suitable supplement? Yes, I have the 50 millimeter lens. Perfect suitable supplement. I also have the 70 to 200. I could shoot at 85. Okay, so I have a suitable supplement. That's telling me, Blake, you do not need that Sony 85 millimeter lens. Okay. Then we'll talk about something else like the 10 millimeter Voigtlander. Yes, the expense was pretty high on that lens. It was $1,200 just for a 10 millimeter lens. But I knew that my frequency of use would be really high with that lens because I love wide angle lenses. So if the frequency is going to be high and the expense is going to be high, then it's probably something that you should consider purchasing, but really put a lot of thought into it. Okay. That's what orange means. Orange doesn't mean no, and orange doesn't necessarily mean yes. It means put a lot of thought into that before you think about it. Okay. If you have a suitable supplement, go to your suitable supplement first. But if you don't, then it might be a good idea to purchase that. Then you have other things like an L bracket, like an Arca Swiss L bracket. The frequency of that would be really high. You'd be putting it on your tripod every single time you use your tripod with your camera. And the expense of one of those L brackets, depending on who you purchase it through, is actually pretty low. Okay, so if the frequency is low and the expense, or if the frequency is high and the expense is low, then yes, buy it. You've got the green light. Okay, the green light right there is basically saying if you're going to use this a ton, and if you were to try and determine that every time you use it, that would be worth, let's say, 50 cents. How many times would you need to use that in order to overcome $30 on an L bracket that you buy from something other than Really Right Stuff? Maybe, I don't know, 60, 70 uses. So yeah, that would be worth it. So let's see here. I had to ask about the Sony a7R III. And you said, wait for this webinar. I have sold a few images and some other things, and I'm looking for the A7R III. I'm working on the zone system and using it better now. I have just 3 lenses for my Sony, which works out just fine for me. Yeah, you know what? I would say if you're with the A7R II right now, you could probably just stick with that. The main differences for you as a landscape photographer between the A7R II and the A7R III, other than $1,000 difference, is going to be the dynamic range. The dynamic range is a little bit higher in the A7R III. I think it's 0.8 stops or 0.8 of a stop more dynamic range, which is quite a bit of dynamic range. But you have to ask yourself, use the frequency chart. So David, for you, for that A7R III, what's your frequency of use going to be? And what's the expense going to be? If you're like me and you use your camera 6 or 7 times a year and the frequency is low but the expense is high, you might be able to do without it, okay? But I'm going to leave that up to you. That's your decision. So I would definitely consider renting it before you purchased it. So that's definitely a good idea. Definitely rent it before you purchase it. I always rent things before I purchase them now. So that's really the way you assess whether you need to get it. The other assessment that we have to factor into this is if the expense is high, is that expense going to put you into debt? If that expense is going to put you into debt and the frequency is low, absolutely, positively do not buy it. Work around it and see what your limitations are and how you can fill in those limitations, okay? So I'm here as the anti-gift buying guide. I'm here as the anti-photography gear buying guide right now. I'm not telling you to run out and buy this stuff. I'm telling you to really consider it, because if it's going to put you into debt, it's not a good situation. And this can carry out not just into photography purposes, but everything for that matter. For us, the dishwasher. What was the frequency? Well, the frequency is pretty high if my wife is washing dishes. And what's the expense? Well, considering it's a dishwasher, it's probably pretty low for the amount of use that we're going to get out of it. So that was a green light to upgrade that. But I'm not going to do that with, say, I don't know, our refrigerator. When our refrigerator was running perfectly fine, our dishwasher was on the way out, so we needed to do that. So you can bring this concept and this little chart right here into just about everything you do. I'll put this chart up on this F64 Elite post too, so you have access to this. Print it out, put it next to you, do what you got to do. I do not want you people going into debt over camera gear. Okay, it's not a good position to be in. So there's a couple questions that you can ask yourself when you're about to purchase that too. Does this thing adapt to my shooting style? So for me, being a wide angle guy, it makes perfect sense for me to get into some of those wide angle lenses. Okay, I'm going to turn my screen share off right now. So it makes perfect sense for me to get into a wide angle lens. It adapts to my shooting style. So if I see a 10mm Voigtlander lens, it's a very unique lens. It's rectilinear. It's a beautiful lens. I'm a very wide angle shooter, so I knew that I could use that. It adapts very well to my shooting style. But the 85mm lens, that's the same price point, does that adapt to my shooting style? No. But a portrait and a wedding photographer, that 85mm is perfect for them. And the 10mm would just be for fun. For me, it's the other way around. The 85mm would be for fun or for random occasions. And that 10mm is definitely something I can use. So you have to put your shooting style and what you do into perspective with the gear that you're purchasing as well. Okay. The next question, I've got some notes right here. Will the frequency justify the cost? I showed you that in the diagram. Will the frequency of use for that object be a good reason to update? Are you going to use it enough to justify the purchase? If the answer is yes to that chart, good to go. Are there favorable alternatives? So I talked about this quite a bit. The favorable alternative for the 85mm lens there, for me, is a 50mm. So do I need that 85? No, it would be an excess purchase. That'd be something I bought off of a whim because I did one shoot with a couple this year. And is it really better? So there's a couple websites that I use to assess whether something's really better or not. One of them is DxO, DxO.com. DxO, they do have their own like raw software or whatever, but their way they test lenses and the way they test camera gear is awesome. So I usually go to DxO. So what you're asking, David, what about the autofocus and shift focus point? The going through all of the menus is a pain in the back end. So with the A7R3, yeah, it does have some updates to the autofocusing. It does have some updating with the touch screen or something like that with the touch to get to your focus point. But you have to understand the frequency of use. Is that going to be something of use to you? Is that worth an extra $1,200 on your purchase for your A7R2? That's the question you have to answer. If it is, then yes, go for it. I purchased the A7R3 kind of on a whim. I saw the amount of dynamic range that was available. I knew that that adapted very well to my shooting style, so I purchased. But it didn't put me into debt. If that was going to put me into debt, there's no way I would have purchased it. None at all. But because it was a business expense and it wasn't really that much outside of it, I was fine. I was fine with that. So those are questions that I would ask you to consider. Another thing is, will it lead to more expenses? So will this one thing that you're going to purchase lead to several more expenses? And this happened to me with the macro. So right after I launched the Color Zone system, I was very, very happy with the success of the Color Zone system, and I wanted to treat myself. So what I did was I said, you know what, I'm finally going to get Canon's 65mm MPE macro lens because I love macro photography. So I bought that lens. But what I realized with buying that lens is that you can't just buy that lens. Canon, the way that thing works, you need a ton of light to shoot at 5x macro. So if you just get a ring light and try to put a ring light on front of it, which was I got a Yongnuo ring light, it's not powerful enough, and actually it can't focus in on onto the object. So at 3x it can, but at 5x it's too close. So really, you have to get the Canon twin flash in order to use the MPE 65 lens. So the MPE 65 macro lens is $1,000. The twin camera flash is $750. So that one lens almost required the exact same amount of money in purchase for something to make it work. Okay, so here, let's take a look at this. I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen over again because I've got a diagram for that. So I'm going to switch on over into Photoshop here. Let me go ahead and actually switch. I hit the wrong screen share. Screen share all of Photoshop. Okay, there we go. This one right here. So here is the cost analysis of what actually this lens actually cost me. So the Canon MPE 65mm macro lens was $1,049. The Canon twin flash was $829, so it was a little bit off. So that alone is a huge purchase. But what I realized was all that gear was so heavy that I actually needed to buy a shoulder stabilizer that someone would use for video gear. All right. So I needed to buy a specific rig to rig this all up. So then I hooked all this stuff up and I realized that the Canon twin flashes don't have diffusers on them. And that's a separate purchase. So I had to buy $14 worth of diffusers. Then I realized, well, I have to put this shoulder rig on, but also reach all the way up to the top of my camera to click the shutter. Well, I need to figure out a way to get a remote trigger onto the handle and put a roll of hockey tape around it so that I could tape that trigger to go into the camera to build this whole giant macro rig that I have. It's a beautiful macro rig. But that one lens did not just cost $1,000. That one lens almost cost double the amount when you stack up all the stuff that had to go with it. Where you could consider this is switching over to a whole new camera setup. So a lot of people will ask me before they go on a workshop with me, Blake, what do you shoot with? And I say Sony. And they say, oh, I've got Nikon. I'm going to switch to Sony. No, 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 no. Please don't do that. These are tools. You are an artist, okay? Whatever tools you are currently working with are the tools that you're going to want to bring with you on these workshops. So the people that are going to Olympic with me, I do not recommend buying anything that you don't need just for this trip, okay? So converting from Canon to Sony is not just buying the body, it's buying that ideal trifecta of your lens kit, right? A wide angle, a 50, and a telephoto. That's the best option there. I usually say if you're going to buy 3 lenses, you're going to have a 16 to 35, a 50 millimeter, and a 70 to 200 or a 70 to 300. That's your ideal spread. Yeah, you're going to be missing somewhere between the 50 and the 70 millimeter mark, but you can cover everything you need to cover with a 16 to 35, a 50 millimeter, and a 70 to 200. If that's all I could take with me, that's what I would take with me in my kit. So now you have to stack up that trifecta. So you want to move over into Sony. Well, now you either need to buy an adapter to hook all of your old camera lenses up to it, or you need to go out and buy a 16 to 35, a 50, and a 70 to 200 or a 70 to 300. So that expense for migrating from one camera to another camera is going to cost quite a bit. So you have to consider how much more this one thing is going to cost you, because it's not just that one thing anymore. It's many different things. So I don't want this to discourage you. I don't want this to discourage you and make you think that I'm some kind of Scrooge. That's not what the point of this is. The point of this whole webinar, and I've gone half an hour talking about this because I'm that passionate about it really, is I want you to consider the amount and the expense of the things that you're purchasing, and do you actually need these things? And I want you to just assess that, because I've gotten to a point where I'm kind of stunted creatively. I'm going to switch over here to something that's in this webinar software that is actually a whiteboard, and I'm going to draw a little picture for you here. So let's say this is your camera, okay? And this is the picture in the end. It's got a pretty mountain, maybe some trees here, happy little trees, okay? What you do to get from here to here, what's in your way from getting to here to here? Well, it's lenses. How many lenses do you have, and which one do you need to go through to get to this point? Well, you want to know what I was like at Olympic? I've got this camera, I've got this camera, I've got this camera, all in my camera bag. I've got this lens, this lens, this lens, this lens, this lens, this lens, and this lens in my camera bag. Yes, I even upgraded my camera bag so I could bring more stuff with me. And then I've got the end result, or the end picture. Now I have to say, okay, which camera do I want? 1, 2, or 3? And which lens do I want to pair with that camera? So now the amount of things I had to think about to get to this point, just having a picture, is way too many things. Talk about stunting and paralyzing your creative measures, okay? And these are the things that you need to consider. What it actually looks like when you have too much. This is what it looks like when you have too much. When you have too many things that can get you to the end result. And what do people see? They see the end result. They don't see that Blake Rudis has a Sony a7R III, a Sony a7R II, a Sony a6300, oh, and an A7 IR camera in his kit. They just see the end result. And the end result is the most important. Do you need all this to get there? No. Life could be much simpler if I was on this path. So that's what I'm getting to next year. I'm also going to show you another thing here. I'm going to hop out of this whiteboard. I'm going to hop back into Photoshop. I'm going to give you a really good depiction of what I'm talking about right now. So a really good depiction of what I'm talking about is right here. Perfect example. I'm going to open up this image, and I'm going to open up this image. You know what the difference is between these two photographs other than the landscape? One of them was taken with a cell phone. The other one was taken with a Canon 6D with a 16 to 35 millimeter lens on it. Ooh, how much does that sting? Can you tell the difference here? You're in the comments right now. Can you tell the difference? If you just go ahead and put it in the comments. Do you think number one is the cell phone or the Canon? We'll just say that. This one right here. Is 1B the cell phone or the camera, the Canon camera? Okay? Because the end result, we've got one that was taken with a camera, one that was taken with a cell phone. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to tell the difference between which one of these is which. Now, am I telling you to downsize your kit to a cell phone? No, that's not what I'm getting at here. What I'm getting at here is the end result. You are seeing the end result of which one is the cell phone or which one is the Canon or the Canon camera. So in this, I'm looking at the comments while I'm trying to talk about this. So most people are saying that 1B is the cell phone. So yeah, this actually is the cell phone picture. You did pick out the right one. This one is the one from the Canon. So I'm glad you were able to see that. That means I probably taught you something pretty good along the way. But the main concept here is that if you were to print these out and share them with someone and ask them which one was taken with a camera and which one was taken with the cell phone, they probably wouldn't be able to tell you. You might not even be able to see. Digitally, you might be able to see, but you wouldn't be able to tell in a print. So what I'm getting at here is the end result. You got a camera and you've got the thing that you need to get to. Don't let all that stuff in between debilitate you or stunt your creative growth. This year has been really hard on me for that, and I'm going to change for next year. This is me putting myself publicly on the spot to say, Blake, you need to get back to your roots. Not even 2-3 years ago, you were writing about how you didn't need to upgrade things, and now look at where you are. You got caught in a buying trap. 2017 was the year that you got sucker punched. And maybe you might be finding yourself in this position too. I just want you to consider these things. So that was my anti-gift buying guide for 2017. I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate you coming on live today. I think 15 people signed up and 9 people were here. That's awesome. I don't want to take too much of your time because I realize that the holidays are upon us, and we got all this stuff going on. And just get back to your roots. Get back to your roots with your photography. Get back to the roots with the real meaning of Christmas too. Spending that time with your families and just enjoying that. Okay, don't get caught up in this buying crap and all these buying guides that are out there for photographers. You don't need it. You don't need to fill that void. You need to get out and shoot with your cameras. If you're gonna buy anything, buy education. I'm not saying that because I'm an educator. It helps me, but buy the things that are going to help you use that stuff. Because if you don't understand how to use those things, then having them is useless. It's worthless. There's no reason. There's no reason to get caught in the software buying trap. I didn't even talk about that. But so many different software companies have come out with different things in 2017 and progressing into 2018. What do you need? That's a whole story for a whole nother webinar. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being an F64 Elite member. I sincerely appreciate it. This community has grown so much in the last year. I've learned a lot from you, from the critique sessions. I value us. I value us as a community. I value us as an Elite membership. The community is just awesome, and it's growing because of you guys. So let me see what David says. Okay, if you were going to do anything, then work on software. Exactly, yeah. But work on software that works for you. All software is going to go towards your brain differently, okay? That's a webinar for a whole nother day. There are some software that I cannot even open because it and me do not jive well. Not at all. I can't. I just open it. I'm like, bah. You had me at hello. I'm done. Don't need you anymore. There's a couple of them. So you got to use the right stuff. I could go out and do a webinar on software next. That might be a good idea for 2018. Julie, love the education. I will be out there more in 2018. Merry Christmas. Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad you got something out of this one. And I didn't want to offend anybody in this. If you found yourself stuck in a software buying trap or a camera gear buying trap, I don't want you to feel offended by this. I am offended by it because I'm calling myself out. It's funny. It's funny the realizations you come to when you actually do some self and soul searching. So again, I'm going to hop off of here. Thank you very much. Have a Merry Christmas. I'll put the replay up on F64 Elite, and I'll put this out for a whole community to see, and I'll put it out via email. And if you like it, share it with somebody who needs to see it. So thank you very much. I could go on thanking you forever because you guys are awesome. Have a Merry Christmas. Spend it with those that are important, and don't worry about buying gifts for them. Just tell them you love them or something like that. Trust me, that's much more important than buying them a gift. Gary, thank you. Thank you for the awesome webinar. Thank you for showing up to the awesome webinar. Merry Christmas to you too, and thank you, my family. They definitely appreciate you guys too. So I'm gonna hop off, and I'm gonna get this going so I can put it up on our replay. Thanks very much for watching, and have a very, very Merry Christmas, okay? Bye, guys.